In the Bhagavad Gita, the key text of the Hindu tradition, Lord Krishna illustrates to Arjuna the multiple aspects of the divine that are appropriate to all possible human states of consciousness. It is in relation to the different levels of personal aspiration and mental structure that the approach to the divine varies from one individual to another. On the other hand, the idea of a dogmatic faith that is the same for all is absolutely alien to the spirit of the perennial philosophy that embraces and synthesizes both Eastern and Western traditions. Thus, from the aspect of the absolute, the Brahma Nirguna, the pure metaphysical path, one passes on to three successive aspects of the divine. Nirakara, that is, the impersonal God, the God of spirit and truth. Akara, that is, the personal God expressed in the form of a symbol, Brahma, Vishnu and Shiva, respectively the creator, the sustainer and the transformer. And finally Avatara, the incarnate God, or rather the divine principle that expresses itself through a human body. And it is at this level that individuals can finally see and touch the divinity. The Lord walks among men, teaching, correcting, indicating the path, but above all revealing through his life, his behavior, his works the supreme values of truth, right action, peace, love, and non-violence. In our days, Bhagavanri Sathya Sai Baba, in a speech given in Puttaparthi on the occasion of a now famous Mahashivaratri, officially declared that he was the divine incarnation of this era, the Avatara. His words were nothing more than confirmation of what millions of devotees had already intuited with the certainty of their hearts, as they flocked to that remote village in South India from all over the world, attracted by the wisdom, mercy, and extraordinary powers that characterize every divine incarnation. After all, in the poor house where Sai Baba was to be born on November 23, 1926, prodigious events, as if to foretell it, had begun to occur even before his advent. On the day he was conceived, the musical instruments, the cymbals, the drums, without being touched by anyone, emitted melodious sounds, not without arousing a certain fear in that honest family of actors whom fate had chosen to welcome the great compassionate one. They certainly could not have imagined that what was manifesting was Lana Nahatanada, the primordial sound, the divine Om through which the unmanifest appears in the infinite forms of creation. And the prodigious events continued throughout the period of gestation, until, at dawn on November 23rd, the baby was born. That day, a truly alarming event startled the mother and the women who had assisted her in the delivery. From under the blanket on which the child was lying, a large snake appeared, which, before slithering out of the room and disappearing into thin air, rose up and melted in front of the newborn. The snake is a symbol that often recurs in Hindu tradition. It is the bracelet of Shiva, the bed of Vishnu, the sacred thread that encircles the jaws of the waist. It is the primary energy symbolized in the human body by the serpent Undalini coiled in a spiral at the base of the spine. There is an important event connected with the birth of the Avatar that is worth noting. great yogi Aurobindo Bose, who for years had been following an austere discipline in his hermitage at Pondicherry on the Bay of Bengal, aimed at bringing about the descent of the supernatural. On November 24, 1926, that is, the day after Sai Baba's birth, summoned all the members of his ashram and declared that the blissful transcendental consciousness had descended on the planet. He did not in fact make any precise reference, but the coincidence is certainly noteworthy. Regarding the mystery of the avatar, Bhagavan Sathya Sai Baba puts it thus: there is a great difference between your birth and the advent of an avatar. You are born as a result of your karma, the cumulative effect of good and bad actions in previous incarnations. But avatars are born because of the vices of sinners and the virtues of pure souls. They carry with them the burden of the past, but they come only to re-establish dharma, divine law, and to protect justice. When an avatar decides to incarnate, all the details of his human history are organized in advance, like a writer who writes the story in every detail before bringing a drama to the stage. The human career of the avatar is conceived by the Absolute, and his story is a myriad of events linked together and deriving from the graces granted and the punishments inflicted on many people. Then the master adds, not without a hint of irony, it seems that within certain limits you can choose your wife, your friends, your job, but for me everything is predetermined. And in relation to this pre-established program, the master has declared that he will leave his body at the age of 96, dividing his stay on the planet into 3 periods. The first 16 years are characterized mainly by divine games, the next 16 by Mahima, the miracles, and the remaining 64 by Upadesha, the teachings. He assured, however, that Lila, Mahima, and Upadesha would be the salient notes of their period, without however excluding each other. Up to now these 3 periods, of which the last is still in full swing, have followed one another punctually, respecting in all respects the program pre-established by the avatar. In this video we will focus, albeit briefly, only on the first of these 3 periods, the one characterized by the Lila. Jana na na. The term Lila is commonly translated as Geo, literally meaning the representation of forces and energies in perpetual movement that are expressed in the spontaneous act of creation and transformation. Lila is the absolutely free movement, similar to the play of water in a fountain. From a philosophical point of view, it represents the manifestation, the presence of the divinity as an autonomous cosmic principle that expresses itself in every aspect of the empirical world, without however being involved in the becoming of its own projection. The natural theater in which the little incarnate played his divine game was mainly the small village of Puttaparthi with its wonderful surrounding hills and the Chitravati river that runs along it from north to east. The elementary school that Sathya attended provided a group of ardent devotees made up of the little companions to whom the avatar already taught medical cults, prayer, the singing of the bhajans, materializing for them all sorts of gifts, pencils, erasers, notebooks, and even sweets still warm and steaming. He reserves these manifestations only for children of his own age, without ever showing off his powers in front of adults. But even with his little friends, he would tone down his divine dignity to the utmost, taking gifts from a bag and making them believe that he was not the author of those miracles, but Satyam, the village goddess. With this innocent stratagem, he gave them what their childish minds could absorb without being disturbed, also preventing the little ones from feeling embarrassed about showing him friendship on an equal basis. Despite this, by the age of 5 Sathya had already been recognized by all the children of the village as their guru, and on the occasion of the festival of Ramavani, he was made to sit on the throne under the image of Rama and carried in procession on a chariot throughout the village. Wherever little Sathya went, he carried with him an intense scent of jasmine that spread in the air, and Vibhuti, the sacred ash symbol of Shiva, would spontaneously form on his forehead, immediately renewing itself as soon as it was removed. In this regard, it should be added that just as little Krishna stole butter from the gopis in his divine dances, so little Sathya, at the age of 3.5, stole turmeric from his sisters to imprint the characteristic red dot on his forehead, which stood out even more against the gray of the vibhuti. The meaning of this Lila is very clear. The vibhuti is the symbol of Shiva. Turmeric is the symbol of Shakti. In fact, the master would later explicitly declare that he was the incarnation not only of Shiva, but also of Shakti. He soon became the darling of the entire village. His charity and compassion drove him to continually search the streets of the village for the poor, the sick, and the suffering, whom he would lead by the hand to the threshold of his house, forcing his mother and sisters to feed them abundantly. The reproaches of his family, who in truth did not have sufficient resources to face this costly and daily philanthropic work, were of no avail. Cornered by his mother's threats, the little master resorted to one of his lilas, stopped eating, and began distributing the food intended for him to the poor. However, despite the prolonged fast, he showed no signs of suffering. On the contrary, he declared that he had eaten abundantly, and as proof of this, he showed his swollen belly to his mother, letting her smell his right hand, which still bore the unmistakable scent of the finest dishes. When asked about the origin of that food, he replied with a wink that it was provided to him by a certain old man he knew whom he called Tata. Who this invisible and mysterious visitor was is not known. The fact is that this and many other inexplicable events involving the little boy soon made him famous in the nearby villages. But what amazed people most was his omniscience. Soon everyone turned to him, not only Hindus, but also Muslims, like that old cart driver in despair after losing his horse, his only financial resource. After searching in vain for the animal, scouring the surrounding countryside with the help of relatives and friends, the old man turned to little Sathya, who immediately directed him to a certain location where the horse was found grazing peacefully. The divine Lilas are never an end in themselves, the Pandits explain, but are always charged with symbolic meanings. Regarding the episode just mentioned, it is interesting to note that in the Sanskrit language horse and universe, respectively asba, have the same etymological derivation. Both terms express change, mutability, and the task of the avatar is to lead humanity back to the immutable, invariable law of Dharma, the path of righteousness from which it has strayed. The first sign of restoration by the two avatars, Sai and Sai Baba, was symbolically expressed in the finding of the lost horses. It is appropriate to call attention here to Kalchi Avatar, the incarnation of Kali Yuga, depicted riding a horse and holding the nets firmly in his hands. At the age of about 12, in order to attend high school, Sathya moved to Uravakanda, where his elder brother taught Teli. His fame had preceded him, and soon not only his schoolmates but even the teachers vied to be near him. He responded to him with gentleness and patience, fulfilling everyone's expectations, but revealing only a glimmer of the power and majesty inherent in that fragile adolescent body. The time was not yet ripe, but he would soon begin the divine manifestation in all its splendor. The fateful hour arrived on the evening of March 8, 1940. From one minute to the next his attitude changed completely, and since this sudden and inexplicable change was marked by a powerful cry, everyone believed that he had been bitten on the foot by a scorpion. But there was no trace of the poisonous insect on the ground, nor was there any unmistakable sign of the sting on Sathya's foot. After all, that night the young boy slept peacefully, showing no signs of suffering. But the following day his behavior became even more mysterious and inexplicable to his relatives and friends. His parents, who had not yet fully realized the divine nature of the one they considered only their son, bewildered and worried by this sudden and mysterious change, first turned to doctors and priests, and finally to astrologers and magicians. Sathya endured everything, even the torture inflicted on him by a self-proclaimed sorcerer, convinced that the boy was possessed by a spirit. He was shaved bald. With a story, 2 X's were coldly engraved on his head and one on his forehead. And while blood gushed out in streams from the 3 wounds, the sorcerer poured a caustic substance made from citrus juice, acids, and salt over it. The boy's face, eyes, and neck swelled up terribly, but he remained calm, motionless, and smiling, without uttering a single complaint. He limited himself only to reassuring his family members, who were instead crying in despair in front of the terrible spectacle of those tortures. When the sorcerer concluded his cruel treatment, Sathya had his sister Venkama bring him a herb that grew nearby and whose juice, spread on the wounds, healed them immediately, also making the swelling disappear from his face. Many still wonder today what the meaning of this episode was and why the master wanted to subject himself to that useless torture. Many years later, questioned by Professor Kasturi, Baba replied, "I want people to know that one can remain insensitive to what happens to the body. I have come to remind people of the truths that they have forgotten. How could they have faith if I were not the first to put them into practice?" Quote. The Avatar had already begun his task as a divine instructor, teaching by example the patience, obedience and respect due to parents. But on October 20th, 1940, when all attempts to cure him had been made, he turned to his family with a smile and said to them, "Why are you so worried? Haven't you understood yet that there can be no doctor capable of curing me?" Quote. "What should we do with you then?" His father asked him. "Keep your minds pure. I no longer belong to you. I am no longer your Sabya. I belong to the Apastamba Sutras and descend from the solar dynasty of Gadra. I have come to alleviate your suffering." Quote. And it was on that occasion that he uttered for the first time his real name, already used in his previous incarnation. "I am Sai Baba." And, to confirm this, he took a bunch of jasmine petals in the hollow of his hands, threw them into the air and the flowers, falling, formed the name Sai Baba in characters on the ground. Before leaving his father's house forever, he added, "Your Venkavauda, an ascetic saint, ancestor of the family, prayed that I should be born in this house. So I came, but now I can no longer stay. I have a mission to fulfill. My devotees are calling me." Shortly after, in the garden of Subama, his first great devotee, sitting on a rock among the flowering trees, the master composed and taught the crowd the first bhajan dedicated to him, Manasa Bhagyare, Guruam. This wonderful song that is still sung today invites one to meditate at the feet of the Guru, but in reality it has the value of a real call. The divine Lilas followed one another at a rapid pace over the next 2 years. The day at Puttaparthi was marked daily by miraculous events that attracted ever-increasing crowds to the small village. A first shed was built and tents were erected to house the pilgrims. Often, Baba, informed that there was insufficient food to feed all those people, would provide instantaneously with one of his miraculous interventions. He would break 2 coconuts by banging them together. He would sprinkle milk on the containers containing the food intended for the guests and, as if by magic, the food would reproduce itself so much that it was enough to feed even those who arrived late in the evening. In those days, there was not a day that Baba did not perform one of his divine Lilas. These were very common occurrences for those who lived near him in the ashram. One of his early devotees recounts that one day, while a bhajan was being sung in which the serpent was mentioned, a large cobra with its hood open suddenly appeared. Everyone screamed in fright, but Baba calmed them down. The serpent remained there until the song ended. Then Baba ordered him, "Now you can go," and the cobra immediately disappeared. In those days, Baba often led the devotees to the banks of the Citravati, and from the sand of the river he extracted all sorts of gifts for everyone. Sometimes they were famila, sometimes medals with his image. More often they were still steaming sweets and even vials filled with amrita, the nectar of the gods. The lucky devotees of that time recount that on more than one occasion the master would suddenly disappear from the river bank, and a moment later, while they, bewildered, looked around to look for him, he would call them in a loud voice from the top of the hill, where there is a large tamarind tree. A lila of wine worthy of being remembered is also linked to this tree. Hindu tradition says that there is a tree called Kalpataru, capable of fulfilling all the wishes of the devotees. In reality, that tree symbolizes the master himself. He alone, in fact, is capable of putting an end to the worries and desires originating from ignorance and incompleteness. The tamarind tree of Puttaparthi was often transformed by Baba into a shoemaker. The master would lead the devotees there, and they could pick the fruits they desired from the branches, even those out of season: oranges, figs, apples, mangoes, bananas. It was enough to make a wish, and the fruit would immediately appear hanging from one of the grains. However, everyone agrees in affirming that the most beautiful experience of those times was the darshan of light, or, as others call it, the vision of Shiva. Baba usually granted this wonderful phenomenon towards dusk so that the luminous effect would stand out even more in the early evening shadows. After announcing that miraculous darshan to the devotees, Baba would suddenly disappear and immediately reappear at the top of the hill, while a blinding flame radiated from his forehead, or rather from Shiva's third eye. At other times they would see a whirling wheel of light that would grow larger and larger from his head, expanding infinitely. Some of the devotees, faced with this phenomenon, would lose consciousness and fall as if struck by lightning. In an instant the master was beside them. With a light touch of his hand he would bring them back to consciousness and, joking and playing to reassure them, he would lead them back towards the village where the first lights of the night were already coming on. We will conclude this film on the divine Lilas here, not only for reasons of time, but also and above all because we are aware of the impossibility of dealing exhaustively with a subject so delicate, so vast and so difficult to convey with the cold instrument of images.